Welcome to this new episode of the Medical Device Expert Podcast presented by the Journal of Medical Device Regulation. This podcast is directed to regulatory affairs professionals working in the international medical device arena. Our invited guests are high-profile specialists who discuss topical issues and give valuable insight and practical advice on regulatory topics. Today, we will tackle an issue that I personally find very important, which is the sustainability and eco-friendliness of medical device industrial production. I am very happy to welcome Anna Novakovich and Haroon Atchia from the London-based medical device consulting firm Quality First International. Apart from being an ardent football fan, Haroon is also a member of the journal's editorial advisory board and a frequent contributing author of the journal. Welcome, Anna and Haroon.
Thank you, Maria.
Pleasure to be here.
By way of introduction, please could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your roles within Quality First International?
I'll start. I'm Haroon Atchia. By background, I'm a geneticist and biochemist, but I'm also a medical device specialist and a microbiologist. I specialize in a variety of products, including high-risk medical devices, biomaterials and implants specifically. Additionally, in cardiovascular, a much wider range. So I founded the company in 1995. I have previous roles in research and diagnostic microbiology, research and development at industrial companies, and then I work for the UK Department of Health, regulating implants and toxicology. I'm an assessor, a lead assessor. I'm also a compliance inspector, and I serve on a variety of standards committees, notably with ASTM. As you indicated, I follow certain football activities now and then, so that's also interesting. So I conceived an area of deficiency in our industry, which was environmental factors and controls, and for that reason, I committed the company to developing revolutionary and innovative solutions to try and deal with the problem of medical device environmental activities, including waste. Further, to look at the situation from a fundamental basis, which was to look at it not only from management systems activities, which hitherto that has been the case. So for that reason, Anna was recruited to assist in this area.
Thank you.
So I have, as you can, thanks for your introduction. I have an environmental engineering background, specializing in environmental protection, natural resources management, and sustainable business practices. In QFI, I'm engaged as a technical specialist. And as Haroon mentioned, I am engaged in development of some sort of unique medical device environmental waste potential management program, which is designed, of course, to help manufacturers to produce environmentally friendly medical device products and services, and basically integrate environmental consideration in the industry processes. Apart from that, I'm also dealing with regulatory compliance, medical device regulations, and medical device vigilance, including recalls and incidents reporting in Q5.
Thank you. So to set the scene a little bit, in your opinion, are medical device companies aware of the full environmental impact of their devices? And does this awareness vary through the different life cycle stages of the device?
Shall I start?
Why don't you start?
Yeah. So I believe it's important to mention that existing legislation does not really define the medical device life cycle. It does say that it's during the lifetime of the device. So this kind of definition doesn't really gives us clarity on what kind of which life cycle stages actually involved in lifetime of the device, and if, let's say, environmental impacts from the disposed device can be considered in this in this lifetime, you know?
I would also add the problem with life cycle is somewhat of a cliche term. It's not well defined. There's no specific uniform or universal internationally recognized definition. So this poses certain difficulties. So when we're considering medical devices, our concepts of life cycle, which are traditionally the cradle to grave situation, doesn't apply when we're looking at a situation where environment is concerned, because once a device is no longer serviceable, i.e. that it cannot continue to do its function, and in some capacity must be either decommissioned, disposed, or destroyed in some function, it can still have an effect on the environment. So there are two problems now. One is the obligation to define and characterize your life cycle in such a way that you deal with your engineering requirements to produce a medical device, and then you have a superimposing obligation on what those commitments might be to a more global picture, which I think, as Anna will describe in a little while, is one of the key problems we face when looking at this area conceptually. The other problem with life cycle is, where should it end? Should it end at the obligation to decommission and remove from use, or otherwise destroy a product, so that it's no longer actually a medical device and it's returned to some form of constituent? And therefore, what are its obligations once you've restored it to that state, or even to an altered state, so it's no longer the raw material that you've started with? That's one aspect. The second problem which we face is some medical devices have no physical manifestation, and they're entirely electronic. However, they have an environmental impact by virtue of their origin, which is they may be produced from semiconductors somewhere which is operating on a computer. And so if that's the case, then the impact is wider than the physical manifestation of the device. Traditionally, the problem has been confined to packaging, and these are rather soft and not, I would say they are disingenuous ways of looking at medical device impact. So that's why we feel that the life cycle aspect is an area that needs further research.
That's an important point, yes. And I think it would be fair to say that most medical device companies consider the concepts of safety, efficacy, and cost when designing their devices. But not so many also consider environmental impacts and consequences from produced and used devices. Could you explain to us what sustainability is actually, and why this concept is important to the medical device industry?
Well, indeed, I would say that we're living in an era where obligations to maintain social healthcare and economy are much stronger than actual environmental considerations. So we have this kind of issue when we're thinking about medical device. We think, oh, it's saving lives, it's helping us. So why should we think further about any kind of environmental issues? So not everyone is aware that actually economic and social stands are simultaneously connected to environmental issues, and of course, three of them represent their sustainability. And I guess for us as medical device environmental professionals, we consider sustainability as some sort of system or structure where organization identifies parameters to achieve economic objectives without actual, detrimental effects on environment or, stakeholder factors.
I would add the other problem is that Anna's mentioned, for instance, sustainability, and so view Maria and the other aspects relating to the design of life cycle, for instance. One of the problems we face is the meaning of environment in context of medical devices. I think, and I'm looking at it dispassionately from a scientific point of view, the term environment is used much more widely in public jargon. You see it in the environment, in the popular press, for example. It's in the scientific press, and of course in academy in general terms. But in medical devices, our use of the word environment has traditionally meant the environmental controls in production, for instance. So as I mentioned, I myself am a microbiologist, so one of my areas was to look at environmental cleanliness or the environmental aspects of production. Hitherto that didn't include the wider environment. In fact, it's a trouble to use the terms in essence for the same activity or different activities. And I think one of the problems is for the industry to advance, there has to be a recognition that environment means much more than simply production activities. The second problem, I think, which is pertinent, is the concept of sustainability, which I know is going to come up in a little while. This is new to us in the medical device field. It isn't well understood by us. Probably most medical device manufacturers, even if they use recognized goal-oriented voluntary standards like ISO 14001, they have no real concept of what this means, and they have little concept of how to reduce it into practical solutions. So they go about producing their quality systems to fulfill a standard that in itself, in my opinion, isn't suitable. So this also presents problems. So when you ask about if medical device manufacturers or the industry in general is aware about more than just safety, you mentioned the word efficacy. In Europe, of course, we use performance instead of efficacy and effectiveness. They tend to be more used in America. In those situations, we do not really understand more widely what design obligations might be for environment. We do understand, for example, the REACH regulations and the ROS obligations, which are to do with restricted substances, and even with biocides, for instance, but we do not tend to apply or at least include them in our engineering considerations. So this is a problem that we faced, and we've looked at it not only from the point of view of practice, but how could it be that an industry which is has a global picture doesn't look at environment globally. Some of the leading multinationals do offer, and they do have initiatives in sustainability, but do they go far enough? So, and is it that they need further legislation, for instance, defining specific controls? These are problems I think the industry faces. Anna probably has similar views, but perhaps could explain a little bit about some of the fundamental research that we've had to consider, because although I understand the use of the word environment in microbiological terms, I did not understand it in environmental terms, and that's a significant problem. So I'm sure that that is something that the industry has to come to grips with sooner rather than later.
Yes, I think your questions or what you are saying is bringing us to the necessity of regulatory guidance or the lack thereof. So my question is in the new European regulations on medical devices and IVD, they do not include any requirements specifically relating to environmental sustainability. But are there any other European regulations or directives that are applicable to the environmental sustainability of devices?
Well, this is actually an excellent question, because if you look at the Annex 1 of the main existing legislations for medical device industry, like Council Directive 9342 EC, new European regulations as 2017-745 and 746, also UK medical devices regulations from 2002 now is amended. Mm-hmm. All these pieces of legislation describe actually fundamental requirements for design and manufacture of medical devices, but they do not include any, let's say, environmental performance requirements, or actually they do not include any requirements for, let's say, environmental, to look at environmental risks and impacts, or which related to medical device waste and medical device itself. So as Haroon mentioned, we also looked at the European and UK national and regional legislations on hazardous substances, on waste, like REACH, WASH, General Waste Directive,
and packaging waste.
Packaging waste as well, and we identified that these documents actually can be used to improve, environmental sustainability, but they only partly consider medical device waste. So they can be partially used, but there is, at the moment, we can say that there is no actual, specific legislation covering medical device waste and obviously environmental impact potential.
Yes, I would add, though, I'm not so confident that the legislation that Anna's just mentioned offer much advantage. They do have some relevance for medical devices, but they're not geared towards the concept of sustainability, I don't feel. There are some specific initiatives, for example, restricting substances, but these are not necessarily relevant to medical device environmental waste impact or profile. So therefore, you cannot really say that they go some way towards fulfilling the notion of sustainability. One of the key problems is we don't really understand what sustainability is, at least in our sector. So that has to be defined appropriately in such a way that medical device enterprises can apply and reduce them into systems or practices geared towards protecting the environment. The other thing I would add is the audience for medical device regulations, which goes back before the European directives, for example, on medical devices, and now the more recent regulations. They're not geared toward a sector which is intent on sustainability or environmental protection. They were geared towards a consumer who is actually a patient, user, and others. So the audience for environment there isn't really the correct audience. It's possible, and there are initiatives I know started up at European Commission level to look at this more widely. I'm not sure exactly when they will report, but it could well be that these will be seminal pieces of work. Already the EU has introduced obligations that manufacturers must make sure that products continue to operate and fulfill, their function, and that they must not do any harm to the environment. These are recent high-level initiatives, although the underlying legislation doesn't exist. How that can be accomplished, especially in the current climate with the economic downturns in various parts of the world, although these are laudable goals, I'm not so sure. But they don't go far enough, in my view. They tend to rely on the old mantra of waste management, and I don't think that this is the approach to take. And this is why I believe a radical concept is needed, and not just for medical device industry, but industry generally has to take a cold, hard look at itself.
What about voluntary standards or guidance documents? Are there any?
Well, there are no medical device standards that cover environmental issues of this nature. There's a goal-oriented voluntary standard published by ISO. That's ISO 14001. I'm sure you've heard of it, but in my opinion, the standard isn't suitable to deal with its environmental protection obligations. When you dissect the standard, there's only a handful of requirements, and they are geared to management systems orientation. There is an obligation to do a preliminary assessment, but it's ill-defined. It isn't suitable to achieve what we believe, which is a fundamental rethink of how medical devices are designed, manufactured, and must be viewed throughout their life cycle when it is defined adequately, such that a true sustainability, whatever that may mean, is achieved on a global scale. And then that links well, if it is achieved, that would link well into environmental concepts that we've been considering, which I don't know too much about, but Anna can tell you about, to do with planetary boundaries and operating spaces, etc., which I do understand from medical device aspects. But these are sorely lacking in the industry. So for this reason, actually, we are writing our own standard. QFI will publish a standard, which will be a management system standard geared toward the medical device sector. That's in preparation now. It will be published early in 2022. But we hope that that will tie the medical device requirements, such as the regulations you've mentioned, other voluntary standards, to the concepts that we've been researching to do with environmental sciences, which I think hitherto the medical devices sector is not really great at, except some of the leading blue chip multinationals, I would say.
So if it isn't a legal requirement for medical devices to be designed in an environmentally friendly or sustainable way, what are the incentives for companies to consider these concepts?
Well, I would say currently there is no governmental incentives, or they are very limited for medical device industry to go green. But from our research and from obviously, development of our program, we know for sure that if manufacturer will decide to move towards environmental sustainability of the medical device, that the company will obviously improve their awareness and communication on environmental issues, and consequently improve their environmental business performance. Business environmental performance. And of course, if you can think, it will help to achieve production of more environmentally friendly products and services. It will, of course, help to meet increasing stakeholders' expectations, increasing demand for the sustainable products, and we believe it will improve reputation of the company and competitiveness on the market, which of course attracts new investors, new markets, and leading to enhanced business profitability.
I think Anna makes a good observation about stakeholders. We don't really know which stakeholders are engaged when it comes to environmental aspects of medical devices. Usually you can predict what these stakeholders' interests might be. So from a manufacturer, it is to produce high quality, safe, effective devices, to use the phrase that you indicated earlier, that actually are successful in alleviating disease, for instance. But on the other side, from the stakeholder perspective of the user, as a patient, the patient wants to be treated. He or she probably isn't interested at the time of treatment about the environmental impact or profile of a device, for instance. So that kind of stakeholder engagement, I don't think is well elaborated from the point of view of environmental management, for instance, and obviously that needs a wider debate. We see a lot of green initiatives. Again, I'm not so certain what would we mean by a green medical device. This is a term we use even internally, but we're not certain that could we even produce a green medical device, and what is its ultimate position. So I believe that there will probably be, you'd have grades of how well a device is in terms of its environmental impact and what legacy it leaves after it's actually been returned to the soil, as it were. We don't know what that is. And for some substances, clearly, if they contain, for example, radioisotopes, we have other issues to consider. So it does need, I think, probably years of research. And of course, if you consider current situations that have been described, we don't have that much time to look at these aspects fundamentally. So research must be accelerated, not only at geopolitical level, like at, for example, the European Union level, but at the United States, for example, and other geopolitical powers, but at national and regional level. You could argue that the medical device industry has been somewhat cosseted because of its unique niche and where it operates. So it's somewhat immune, if you like, from other environmental impacts that you see in other sectors. There have been token, I would say, efforts regarding packaging waste. They're not entirely successful, although of course the tonnage quantities are fine. But mostly the initiatives reflect the ongoing situation about emissions, carbon dioxide, waste, pollution. They're not really relevant, I feel, to transforming the industry into a friendly, environmentally friendly industry with ultimately green products. I think more is needed. It might sound negative, but I'm not certain that continuing on the path that we've taken, which is quality management systems for environment and a few associated documents and pieces of legislation on packaging, for example, or reach and roach is sufficient. It needs a strong commitment fundamentally to look at products at the most rudimentary level.
So Haroon, in 2019, you published an article in the Journal of Medical Device Regulation proposing a number of basic environmental performance requirements. These BEPRs define attributes specific to medical devices that could be used to produce designs consistent with a sustainability philosophy. The individual BEPRs are grouped into 8 main sections. Do you want to talk about those and how companies could make use of them?
Well, the idea is not a new idea. The concept of reducing things to their fundamentals actually has its origins to the first of the European directives on medical devices. As you know, these were part of the new approaches that the European Union conceived. So I'm not sure who can be attributed to the origin of those ideas. I know some of the original people who wrote essential requirements, but these were imaginative solutions to try and take a huge industry with a breadth of products and technology and treatment areas and then try and reduce them to fundamentals was a mammoth achievement. Yeah, you can criticize if the essential requirements are good enough, for example, or bad enough, or wide enough or deep enough. That's not important so much. What is important is the European Union was able to, of course, it wasn't named the European Union at the time, but the Commission at least was able to come up with a notion whereby you could actually, for the first time, assess products using common approaches. And the essential requirements were a tremendous idea. So when I was conducting research into some of these fundamentals, it became clear to me that actually I don't understand enough about environment and I needed to know more. So the first thing, of course, I want to know is, well, how can you reduce a medical device to its environmental profile? And I couldn't find anything. So what better way to start was actually than by actually looking at what other predecessors in the field of medical device regulation might have done. So I looked around. I couldn't find anything in the United States, of course, who is usually a leading source of such initiatives. So I found in the European Union. From the essential requirements, I then conceived 8 basic sets of properties that medical devices might have that would allow a truly sustainable medical device to be designed, constructed, and operated throughout its life cycle, which goes beyond the traditional cradle to grave, but looks at the if you like, the legacy left by the device once it's taken out of service and is disposed of or dismantled or even discarded before use. So that's why they were constructed. I'm sure they can be elaborated and improved. They would certainly need government recognition. We have tried to contact appropriate people in the government, but without much reception, actually no replies at all. And we've started further initiatives to try and publicize through other channels. But if, especially with the UK government's commitment and the COP26 that's about to start, you would think, and the call from our Prime Minister in the United Kingdom for forward-thinking solutions, we believe that, I'm not suggesting that ours is perfect and the right solution, but these approaches seem to me to be the way forward. we would be happy, actually delighted, and would like to be part of a revolution in thinking, at least, and that surely should be part of our continuing mission.
Let's end with some.
So, as you mentioned, there are also additional areas we're looking at. So we've adapted the use of safety indices. So we're publishing insight into that area as well. And more widely, we propose to tackle and try and relate the established practices in environmental management to medical devices, such as things which I don't understand fully, like total operating space, bottom line, etc. Sorry, safe operating space, total, there you are, you see, these areas need to be clarified, and planetary boundaries. And of course, as you know, Maria, being an ardent Star Trek aficionado, I'm very interested in planetary boundaries.
Still working on this one.
Let's end with some practical advice. If a medical device company wants to produce environmentally friendly products and works towards integrating environmental sustainability into its business processes, where should they start?
Well, I would say start from examination of the life cycle of individual products, reduce it to fundamental properties, and obviously consider every aspect of the product in regards to environmental impacts. Well, during development of our program, in our observations, we noticed that global medical device companies tend to focus more on design and manufacturing stage, and obviously sustainable practices during that particular phases, instead of actually targeting the root cause of environmental degradation as the product itself and its waste potential. So we would encourage producers to kind of expand your vision, ask questions, expand your ideas on how you can assess your product, your device, through the environmental impacts and effects that it can have. And of course, if you want to achieve like real leadership on the market, as Haroon mentioned, of course you should consider the design and the design change and manufacturing process change. But we do understand that this kind of how to say implement actions, you cannot do it overnight. Of course, it will require time, it will require investment, but we believe that step by step, improving product risks and impacts to the environment, and integrating environmental sustainability into the product and into the manufacturing processes, and your business operations as well. Of course, it will push you beyond compliance and help you to achieve the green leadership on the market.
I think practically there are some other problems, and I think it's okay to say that they should manufacturers should consider design, for instance, but what will they consider in design? There is very little, from my experience, and I've been in this profession for many years now, there's very little awareness of the environment beyond environmental control in production, for example, or the environmental issues surrounding restricted substances or biocides, for instance, that might be regulated in medical devices. So there's little consideration, for example, about process ancillary substances or their fate of raw materials that receives no or little attention, probably no attention, except I would say again in blue chip multinationals who have an international presence and have an environmental presence. much larger than other counterparts. So I think it goes beyond that. Not only must they consider the engineering aspects about the medical device, it would seem to me that medical devices manufacturers must consider at a much earlier stage what is the final profile or impact each medical device has on the environment. They would need stronger environmental science inside medical device firms, which I would say probably you could count on both hands throughout the industry. That area must be tied intimately into the other professional base that companies have. In terms of going green, I'm not sure what a green medical device will look like. Therefore, these aspects have to be agreed, probably at international level, otherwise they will have little impact or only transient impact. And the other thing is friendliness. I'm not sure what an environmentally friendly medical device actually is. So once again, I would need to understand this. So this means proper legislation, better terminology, fuller understanding of the impact at each stage of the life cycle, using the term in its general stage, related to environmental factors, which will have to be characterized properly. If we allude to what we see in the medical device sector traditionally, high quality engineering is produced, but low consideration for environmental. This would have to change. In terms of practical aspects, know your product is a suitable mantra, but knowing its risks is a more difficult mantra to fulfill. We know this from traditional medical device regulation anyway. So now if we have the dimension of environmental impact with the further complication of constituents in a product, byproducts, reaction products, waste products, pollutants, etc., the picture is much bigger. And this is why I come back to the fact that relying on a goal-oriented standard that is a management system standard, not strictly dedicated to medical devices, despite its scope, isn't sufficient. It needs better technically described activities. Recognition is important. So as soon as this philosophy and this practice becomes evident, then I'm sure the industry itself will transform. Anna says it will take time. If we look at climate predictions, time isn't something we have a luxury of, whether you believe in climate predictions or not. Some of the effects are evident and some are not. Therefore, the industry must consider these aspects more seriously, I would say. On another practical level, I would say, and you asked about this earlier, incentives. Well, what are the proper incentives? Surely it cannot be reclamation of packaging waste. That's at the wrong side of the equation. The incentives must be at the design stage of the equation so that it is factored into thinking at an earlier stage with the appropriate incentives for the industry. Equally, the incentive for stakeholders must be at the start and not at the end, which is the treatment side. So this kind of mentality, I think, requires a radical rethink. There are some notable ideas from environmental science, which I've come to learn a little bit about, but they're not applied into our sector. We don't even know what they mean. We confuse the terms. Education and training is another area, therefore, that is needed, and better publicity.
I agree, and I am very much looking forward to the standard you are planning on writing. I'm sure that will be very insightful and helpful for manufacturers. So thank you both, Anna and Haroon, for this very interesting discussion, and thank you for our audiences for listening. And I am sure this conversation has provided a lot of food for thought for medical device designers, developers, and manufacturers. Thank you for sharing your insights and for being with us today.
You're welcome, Maria. Thank you for inviting us.